Okay, thank you, Izzy, for the nice overview. Now let's take a look at what developing with Garland on a day-to-day basis means. So I'm going to go through 4 points, which one we decided to kind of set up the project were very important for our team, and hopefully they will resonate with you too. And after that, I'll demo a very simple workflow. So ideally, as a backend developer, to achieve a smooth and nice development experience, you want to hide complexity unless you need to really deep dive into something specific to your stack. So ideally, I want to just get up in the morning, open my laptop, and start writing code. That's it. When I join a new team or a new company, I want to check out their repo or branch and not worry about what DB do I need to connect to. Is it a local or remote DB? How do I set it? Do I need to run anything else beside the service that I'm working on? Is there anything that depends on my service? And if that's the case, how do I run it? How do I test it? How do I deploy it? Etc. I mean, we've all been there. This is a huge context that you have to load, and you need to keep it in your head and in your documentations, and you have to update it when something changes. And worst of all, you have to destroy the new hires in the first days of the new job. And honestly, it just sucks and doesn't really scale. And I mean, one of the reasons I joined this company was exactly this. In a garden project, you don't need to load this context altogether unless you need to. And all the dependencies between the modules are codified and visualized in the dashboard, as Aethor showed us earlier. And you can just literally, most of the time, of course, just check out your branch and run Garden deploy, and boom, you're ready to go. And the easiness of this process is what I actually like the most about working with Garden at Garden. And another point that was very important when we were setting up our project was to being able to develop and run the code in an isolated, reproducible environment, and which was as close as possible to a production cluster. And again, spent too much time trying to match the different configuration between my locally running service and a remote service that wouldn't have any port open, or maybe some configuration was not valid between the different environments. And it just, the idea that works on my machine, the idea of works on my machine doesn't really apply when you do cloud native development. And that's the reason why at Garden we decided to fully switch to in-cluster development. So each one of us has their own namespaces, and each one of us deploys the full stack. And that includes like all the vault instances, database instrumentation, etc. And that, of course, has several benefits. I mean, you don't need to check if you're developing against a different version of a dependency, for example, or your environment is reproducible in the sense that you want to Garden version your services. That means that, let's say you want to test something that works how something works in your main branch. You just check out the branch, deploy it, and boom, you have your main branch running on your cluster. Only the service that actually change between the branches will be redeployed and will be retested. So it's easy and fast to switch between branches. And it's also easy to collaborate because you have access to your coworkers' namespaces as well. And you're running on a cluster, which is very important. I mean, of course, there will be differences between your production and dev clusters. I hope there will be differences. But for sure, there will be less differences in that scenario than, let's say, having your 5 services running on your local machine with a bash script that somebody 2 years ago wrote. So, of course, you could also run everything on a local cluster on your laptop, but I mean, that comes with its own limitation because laptops are laptops. And third point that I wanted to mention was very important to have a fast feedback loop while developing. We use hot reload quite a bit, and personally, I tend to like to try out ideas while I work kind of on a new endpoint or something. So I'm able to see the changes that it makes super early and super fast. I don't want to rebuild my containers or want to redeploy anything. I just want to see my changes up and running and as fast as possible. And the last point is we want to run integration tests easily and early. And I think this is one of the coolest part of using Garden. Normally, you'd need the entire stack deployed somewhere to run your integration test, or at least a part of it somehow. And that's why normal integration tests are run in CI, right? You have your staging testing environment, and you run the test, your test against that. But yeah, I mean, guess what? You already have that with Garden, right? You are developing against a running cluster, so we write and run a lot of integration tests at Garden, and we usually do it in two ways. Garden usually either using Garden Dev and Garden Tests, which will if something changes, you rerun these commands, or Garden Dev will rerun the test for you automatically. But this usually takes a while because I mean, again, he has to rebuild all the dependency graphs, so it's not really used while we do hot reloading. Instead, in that scenario, we set up our test in a way that we can shell inside the module where the tests are defined and run them from there. And this is possible because our integration set are set up in a way that we use in our dev cluster the same database for both testing and running the application. And each test suite creates its own temporary schema, populates it with seed data, and clean up itself out afterwards. And we found this to be cheaper than setting up and managing an ADOC integration database instance to only spin up and kill after the integration tests. But yeah, I've been talking quite a lot, so I'm just gonna show you something around now. And so yeah, this is essentially what I do when I turn on my laptop in the morning. I just open my iTerm, and usually I just run Garden deploy. Let's say I'm working on the API service, so I will just hot reload the API, and Garden will do these things. Meanwhile, I will start K9S. K9S is a wonderful tool which we use internally a lot, and I like it because it just gives me a lot of like access to logs and give me the possibility to shell into a container very fast, which is what I usually want. And we also run our API on Express, and we have a tool called SOA, which generates our routes for us. So we have a custom script that checks for any controller changes and regenerates the routes for us. So what happened here with when I run Garden deploy hot API, Garden will go inside the project, check all the dependency. Now this took very little because for demo purposes, I ran a deploy before the webinar started, so all the images are cached, so there was not so much to do. Essentially, Garden did a bit of plumbing for me. One thing that I love is that I automatically can get a port forward to my Postgres instance, so I can just connect to my local. I can reconnect. I can just connect to with PostSecure to my database, like if it was a local database. He started a dashboard, which gives you an overview of your system and what's there, what has failed. You have the stack graph, and we see all the steps that are needed to build, test, and run your application, and all the dependency between each step. And also gives me like a link to the ingress for the front end and for the back end. So we're gonna hold on to this backend endpoint. I created a demo endpoint that just returns success and some data. So the idea now is that I'm on my Visual Studio Code. I'm doing some refactoring, and I realized that this endpoint should return error and should return some wrong data. So as soon as I press save, the SOADEV command will pick up the changes, will regenerate the routes, which Garden will pick up, will resync, will get synced to the API pod, which will restart, and will just update my endpoint. And that's mostly it, essentially. That's how we do a lot of our development. Or at least that's how I do a lot of my development. When we want to run tests, as we said earlier, we have two ways of doing that. You can either run Garden test, which of course will take quite a lot, or you can shell inside a container and just run your own test. And run test we run root, which is not gonna take too long. And yeah, this test will essentially create a new schema into the database, populate it with seed data, run the test. I mean, this is like a very simple test, just for demo purposes. And this also now is building a new image because the version of the module has changed while we're doing hot reloading. So we'll now rebuild the image, deploy a test pod from where we run our actual tests. This is succeeded. This will take too long, so I'm gonna kill it. And yeah, that's mostly it, essentially. With this kind of workflow, I mean, this is of course a very simple one where we don't have to do any changes to our database configuration and anything like just crazy, just essentially controller logic. But yeah, for example, if we have to change the database schema, we run the migration, and we can just run everything through Garden. And yeah, that works pretty well.